Hello, everyone. We're ready to begin, so if you would find a seat. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Abhijan Amanchi, one of the ministers serving this religious community. On behalf of the Parker family and Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church, I welcome you to this service of remembrance and celebration of the life of Russ Parker. Thank you for joining us in person and online from home this morning. After today's service, there will be a memorial reception for those who are joining us in person, where the family will greet you in the lounge after the service, where we can continue to remember Russ and all that he meant to us. And those of you who are joining us online, if you wish, please share your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. We're glad you're here. And in respect of our time together, I ask that you now place any cell phones, smartphones, or other electronic devices on worship mode. We're here this morning to lift up the days of Russ Parker, celebrating his full life. We gather him to our enduring memories and to remember his days among us with care, with understanding, and with deep love that is stronger even than death. Each of us in this sanctuary is at a different stage in our life's journeys. Some are younger, some older. I'm clear that each of us will regard the mysteries of life and death in different ways. We will each be comforted by diverse spiritualities and diverse religions and skeptical understandings. I say this because while Russ was a long-time member of this congregation, I know that today we have gathered as a unique assembly with people from near and far, with a wide diversity of understandings and beliefs about the meaning of both life and death and the interval in between. And beyond belief, we may also express our grief in a variety of ways, sometimes with words, sometimes with quiet withdrawal, sometimes with tears. And sometimes all of those ways of grieving may be present in a single person during the span of a single day. Yet this morning, we all share one thing in common. Russ's life has been woven into each of our own lives in many ways. Our experiences of him now transformed into memories afloat on a sea of great love. We can never hope to speak to all aspects and achievements of Russ's life this morning, but what we bring and share will enrich our understanding of him as a person. And our offerings of memory, love, and intention will be like these beautiful flowers in front of you. Gathered together, they make a bouquet of beauty. And as we leave, we will take with us all those memories to signify perhaps a new insight or understanding about Russ's life and how that life filled our common world. And so, let us turn aside from our accustomed ways and turn our faces again toward the face of the one whose life we remember today with gratitude and love. We open our time together with the lighting of the chalice. The flame we light is an ancient symbol of transformation, and the chalice that holds it is a symbol of the spirit of life and love that Russ embodied. So as Russ's grandchildren, Austin, Ashley, and Katanya, and Elliot, are you up for it? Kindle the chalice. I invite all of us to rise in body or in spirit and share the words that are printed in your order of service. Let us share the words together. We light this chalice in loving memory of our beloved friend and spiritual companion, Russ Parker, and in tribute to the love a single life can inspire. May the chalice remind us of the extravagant gift of life. May it signify the community we create in our being together and our sharing together. Thank you. You may be seated. In her poem, When Great Trees Fall, Dr. Maya Angelou writes, "When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil in silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory suddenly sharpened examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality bound to them takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We're not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses, restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed." Our second reading is from the ancient book of Ecclesiastes, which sheds its wisdom on life and death, perhaps as long as 3,000 years ago. To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. I invite you to please rise in body or in spirit to sing hymn number 8, Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, in the gray hymnals. And Jasmine will play it through once so we familiarize ourselves with the tune. Jasmine? The details of a person's life do not really capture the breadth and depth and richness of a life, but the details are a good place to begin. Our friend Russ Parker was born on May 7, 1931, the youngest child of Molly and Oliver Parker in Clarkston, Washington State. He had two older siblings, John and Charles. It was the height of the Great Depression. Russ's mother was a school teacher, and his father eventually settled down to become an electrician, working any job that he could find to support the family. The family lived in tents for a while, and then a trailer, and eventually in houses that they built from scratch. Russ, at an early age, learned carpentry, plumbing, and electrical work. He did not attend school until age 10, and when he did, he attended a different school once or twice a year. In high school, Russ won the Washington State High School debate contest with Brother John as his partner. And after 11th grade, he enrolled in Washington State College, and after changing majors several times, graduated with a bachelor's in economics in 1952. Having been in ROTC, he was called into service in the Air Force during the Korean War. Russ received training in Russian at the University of Rochester for a year before he was sent to command 50 men on a small island off the northwest corner of Japan. Russ was discharged in 1956. Though accepted by Harvard for grad school, Russ had deferred it until he got back from service. He arrived 4 weeks late into the fall semester, and Harvard said that he needed to wait until the next semester. But Johns Hopkins was willing to accept him, so he decided to go to Johns Hopkins. And after a year, Russ transferred to Michigan State, and then went on to get his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1962. Russ was immediately hired by the FTC in Washington, D.C., where he started working as a chief economist and also director of special projects, testifying in a long career dozens of times before Congress in antitrust cases, and authoring many laws and legislations. Russ retired in 1989. Russ had 3 children from his first marriage, Stephen, Catherine, and Susan. Russ and Judy met in Madison at a gathering where they both discovered that they each bicycled to work. So they bonded over bikes. And they enjoyed biking together all over Madison. I think they still tell stories about you and Russ, Judy. And they were married in 1978. They also became members at First Unitarian Society in Madison. Now, anytime anyone asks Russ and Judy how many children they have, they would reply, "We have 5 children." And now they add, "We have 9 grandchildren." Russ and Judy moved to the D.C. area and then to Bethesda, joining Cedar Lane in 1979. They bought a home here where they lived for 40 years before moving to Asbury Methodist Village in November 2018 with their beloved dog, Ebb. Russ and Judy traveled the world together, visiting over 50 different countries. They loved to swim 5 days a week and go for long walks daily until a series of strokes made it impossible for Russ to participate. Russ died at home under hospice care on March 21st, 2022. Judy?
Thank you for being here to celebrate the life of my husband, Russell. Russ was a highly educated intellectual who never looked down on anyone. He answered questions in layman's language. Russ viewed education as a consumption good, something that brought him great joy, and continued to take classes until he was 80. Russ had an insatiable curiosity. He wanted to know how other people lived. We traveled to over 50 countries, often just the two of us. I insisted that we take tours in Russia and Japan, even though he was fluent in both languages. My high school Latin would be of no use understanding or speaking those languages if I needed to get help for him. We were members of a Cedar Lane dinner discussion group for 30 years until too many deaths made it unsustainable. But our first dinner discussion group started with our children around the dinner table. No topic was off limits as we shared news and challenged ideas. We took public transportation everywhere. We took taxi cabs about half dozen times in nearly 44 years of marriage. Russ loved bicycling 13 miles to work alongside the C&O Canal. In bad weather, he rode the bus and subway. In graduate school, our son Al got permission from the professor who signed against his better judgment to be in a class that required 2 years of economics. When asked later how he knew more than anyone in class, Al said, "My father is a PhD economist. I learned at home." Russ had more vacation time than we had money. We slept in tents and visited relatives in Wisconsin, Idaho, Washington State, and California. Many of our children have been in every national park in the continental United States, also hiking with backpacks the 40-mile length of Isle Royal in Lake Superior. Russ loved and valued family and Cedar Lane Church, which we joined in 1979. He or I were at meetings here 2 or 3 nights each week. When he saw something that needed to be done, he did it. One Thursday, we arrived at Alliance Potluck and noticed that someone had broken into the church the night before, breaking the wood between the entry doors. Russ went to the church administrator, who said he was trying to get 3 bids and it might get fixed the following week. After Alliance, we went home, put wood and supplies in our car. The entry doors were repaired an hour later. We showed the administrator and said we would return the next morning to paint it. We built many benches, including the L-shaped one that Russ designed at the side entrance of Chalice House. Russ learned construction as a child as his family moved to where jobs existed during the Depression. We bought a fixer-upper home in Bethesda. He thrived as we worked tirelessly to fix and repair it and make it livable, eventually building a 1,200 square foot brick patio and fish pond with recirculating waterfall. He drew sketches of beautiful improvements to make his visions become reality for our home. He loved every dog we ever had. We moved to Asbury Methodist about 6 months after they permitted dogs in any of the apartments, and they had constructed a large dog park. Russ was very protective of family and friends. Each 4th of July, we'd guide several children and their friends by metro to a prime spot about 5 feet from a pond. Russ and I would relax while the kids wandered around. One year, Lisa yelled, "Dad, look out!" He turned and lunged toward a lit firecracker, flipping it into the water just before it would have exploded. I will always treasure the life I had with Russ and hold memories of him close to my heart. Steve is going to speak next. Russ would have loved to have been able to celebrate your marriage to Kira next Saturday.
Good morning. My father loved this church, and there is no more appropriate place to celebrate his memory than here. In plotless stories, he would relate many things to conversations he had had with members of this church, as if the fact that those conversations had occurred and the location of those conversations were integral to his understanding of whatever he was talking about. Dad used stories to communicate many things. These stories were not long, rambling things with morals and hidden information lurking in details. Most often, they were short vignettes. One story he told me dozens of times throughout his life was of holding me in one hand when I was less than a week old. I don't remember the actual interaction, as I was less than a week old. But I do remember that what I think was the first time he told it to me. And it was a story that communicated a sense of being protected that made me feel invulnerable. I remember near my fraught 21st birthday how the same story communicated to a great sense of disappointment. Decades later, that same story suggested that it may have almost earned some sort of redemption. The story in details did not change much. He held me in his hand, and my feet did not extend all the way down his forearm. It was closer to my 24th birthday that he let slip the fact that when he held me in his hand for that story, he was packing up and getting ready to move to Washington, D.C. to work in JFK's White House. "You mean Camelot?" I asked him, sort of naughtily when he told me that. And he replied, somewhat annoyed, "Some people in the press called it that." "So, you were one of the best and the brightest," I continued. "That's not a name we used," he responded, as if I'd missed the point he was trying to get with the latest rendition of the story of how small I was in his hand. It almost sounds as if my dad was humble, and that's not really it. More than his versatile stories that lacked plot or explicit message, my dad loved an argument. Argument might even be the term he would use, but it is a poor name for it. Dad was an amazingly intelligent man. He did not argue with people like me. He toyed with us. Sometimes just engaging in an argument with Dad felt like being accepted into a select cadre of intellect deemed somewhat worthy, since Dad would not argue with just anyone. One had to at least present an amusing level of intelligence. One of Dad's favorite openings was the question, "What is the value of money?" I can't think of that line without a touch of pride at how my intelligence was at least amusing, and he would use that on me. I heard this opening enough times to know to avoid that first trap that was hidden in the word money. This was about value and knowing value. If you've never been stuck in that mental quicksand with my father, then you are not simply as amusing as I am. I never figured a way out of that particular quicksand, though, and that's probably a great metaphor for all of the memories that I have of my father. I would often simply tell Dad that economics is called the dismal science, in a way that implied he had never heard it before. Each time I said it, I would say it in a way that implied the same thing. In short, my dad was a great man that changed the lives of people outside of this room for the better. More importantly, for the people in this room at least, he did his best to make things good. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm the youngest of 5. I'm Al. I thought about thinking of ways in which raising my own kids has changed my perspective on my parents. And I decided I'll spare you the philosophy. And instead, I'm going to do what youngest children always get to do. They get to tell secrets. And I'm going to tell you one of Dad's. He might even deny it if he was here. But I know the truth. I know the truth of his actions. I know the truth of what he used to hide in his drawer in the dining room bureau that said Dad only. And that truth is that in spite of his PhD and everything else, Dad was an artist. If you only knew him in passing and you were paying really close attention, you might have noticed a couple of clues. One thing was he loved art. That was abundantly clear. He loved to take us to the national galleries. But also, his handwriting was impeccable. Now, certainly some of that was because his mother was a school teacher, and I'm sure he had no choice but to practice his handwriting. But his signature was gorgeous. It was calligraphy. And most of his things he wrote, and that were just in that. You could have made a font out of it. And that only comes from someone who cares about what it looks like. He also loved to study kanji, and he would love to practice and scrawl that out, kanji out. And that's because he had the soul of an artist. Good friends of his, like the people that came to dinner discussion groups from Cedar Lane, they might have noticed around the house all of the projects that he was constantly engaged in, whether it was building the patio, eventually building a sunroom. And one project that didn't get built, but I loved the ideas of it, was that we were going to knock out the ceiling of my bedroom up into the attic and make a loft. But all of these ideas were sketched out on 3x5 cards, and he would hide them in his drawer labeled Dad only. Sorry, Dad, I went in there. And yeah, it was as if we hide these little beautiful sketches, people won't actually know that I'm an artist. But I get ahead of myself. I think I first realized that Dad was an artist when I was 8 or 9 years old. And we had recently moved to Bethesda, and we joined the Cub Scouts. And it was the Pinewood Derby. And for those, if you're not familiar with the Pinewood Derby, is you're given a block of wood, 4 wheels, and a couple of stickers. And they say, the child is supposed to carve this and put it together, and then we'll race it down a track, kind of like a miniature soapbox derby. And so, being in Russ and Judy's house, we were rule followers, so I did it all myself, and I cut sort of a wedge of wood, and I hand sanded it, and I did everything and painted it myself. And then came the event. And I get there, and I was disappointed that my car wasn't the fastest, but I sort of accepted that. But what was outrageous to me was I looked around and I saw all of these cars that clearly had a lot of parental interaction. And it was really funny thinking about this, and I even could remember the name of the boy who really ticked me off, Tony Walpole. Tony Walpole's car was gorgeous. It was airbrushed, and it had stuff that was glued onto it, and it was incredible. And what bothered me even more than that was the fact that everyone was raving about Tony Walpole's dad. And I was furious. I was like, everyone's saying how cool Tony's dad is. And here I am with my wedge of cheese as a car and thinking, my dad's cool too. And I plotted my revenge. So the next year came time for the Pinewood Derby, and we get our block of wood. And Dad and I are sitting we go down to the basement to his workshop. I love the workshop. But I was only ever allowed to use the hand tools. And we start drawing on our block of wood. And we come up with these crazy shapes and stuff. And we're like, okay, this is it. And Dad gets out the belt sander. Now, this is probably the event that made me cemented in my mind that the belt sander was Dad's absolute favorite tool. But he would clamp the belt sander in the vise so that it was spinning like this, and he could just shape the wood by hand. And so as we worked at it, we came up with a car that was sort of a mix of 1930s Grand Prix racer, and it made love to a 1970s Corvette. And this is what we came up with. And it didn't matter that the car wasn't the fastest. It was cool. And it was very funny because I don't think I even got to shape it because it was too dangerous. But I think the truth was Dad was in his element. And he was just in the zone of his inner artist having the opportunity to come out and express itself. And so he would carved and shaped, and there it was. And so as I raise my own kids, I realize, yeah, we don't always know what part of us our kids will carry forward with them. I was never going to study economics. I was never going to get a PhD. But what I do carry with me is Dad's constant designing, sketching, just like, yeah, we can make that, and make cool stuff together. And that is what I love. So thank you, Dad.
Please rise to sing hymn number 114, Forward Through the Ages.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming here today to honor my grandfather, Russ, and just remember him today. My name is Austin Catania. I'm a grandchild of his, and my parents are Tom and Lisa Catania. And my sister, Ashley and I were reminiscing about the fun times we've had with Grandpa. And while she is the much better writer than I am, I'm a little more comfortable public speaking, so when I read through this, I'm speaking on behalf of both of us. So Grandpa was always around when we grew up, from annual holiday get-togethers to camping and hiking trips, to hometown events such as the Halloween parade, and to our extracurricular activities such as soccer, volleyball, and marching band. One thing that we quickly learned is Grandpa absolutely loved food, especially the sweets. Now, Grandma ensured that we would get our main course and our veggies, but he always made sure that there was dessert. Even on outdoor adventures such as hiking, when Grandma was always prepared with lunches for everyone, Grandpa enjoyed knowing that there were some sweet treats as well. Not to mention that when it came to Halloween and he was passing out candy, he was usually setting aside a couple for himself, but that was until we would come back with our loot and the candy negotiations would begin. And if any of you know Grandpa Russ, he is quite the negotiator. So now Grandpa was also a competitor. We usually saw this side at various sporting events where he would eagerly watch and cheer us on from the stands. Even as we attended the minor league Frederick Key games, he would be totally immersed, which also gave us the chance to teach him that we shake our keys for the 7th inning stretch. And he even enjoyed some football. And while he wasn't an NFL fan, he would still attend the high school and college games to watch me drum in the marching band. And growing up, it was a tradition to go camping every Memorial Day, and without fail, it would always rain. So during those days, we would all climb into the grandparents' RV and play a variety of card games and heat up some food. When it wasn't raining, Grandpa was unafraid to swim laps in the cold lake while Ashley and I were debating if we should run into the cold water or take the slow approach. And at the end of the day, we'd be back at the campsite, warming around the campfire as we watched in amazement at how Grandpa would roast his marshmallows to perfection. I mean, every square inch of that tiny little marshmallow was golden. He'd spend like 30 minutes. And Ashley and I, ours would usually either catch on fire right away or end up in the fire. And at the grandparents' house, they had this really nice backyard that Russ put a lot of work into. And we would love to run around it because of all the wooded trails and follow the different paths that he created and play different games with the cousins. They also had a fish pond that would hold some pretty large fish. Occasionally, the fish that we would bring would be from the carnival, and they would be like, yeah, go ahead, throw them in. And along with this was a garden that they had with various vegetables, and they would always show us what they were growing, but they would also point out to us as well where the rabbits kept breaking in and eating all the food before they could. And one of my favorite memories is, I don't know how old I was, but they had this giant pile next to their vegetable garden of leaves that they would gather, and it just seemed like the coolest thing to me for them to be like, hey, go ahead and jump in those leaves. And so Ashley and I were just jumping around this big pile of leaves, and that was my favorite childhood memory. So it was wonderful for them to have us do that and just play around. So these are just some of the fond memories that we will always cherish and be able to look back on as we remember him today. Thank you.
Judy, as you know, I've known you and Russ for many years because we were all in a dinner discussion group together. Russ was a smiler. Whenever he arrived, he had a smile on his face. Whenever he came to church, the same. There was a smile and a twinkle in his eye, ready to share an idea about church, about the federal government, about anything. He was well informed. We've known each other since around 1988, and I think we were easy friends because you two had not too long ago come from Wisconsin, and I hail from the state next door, Minnesota. Russ's soft voice also gave the feeling of talking with a totally sympathetic person, and he was. Russ clearly cherished the life that he had with you, Judy, and with your family. Initially, 2 children of yours, 3 children of his, but always raised completely together, one family. And Russ enjoyed talking about family members with pride and enthusiasm. Russ enjoyed entertaining at the lovely home on Bradley Boulevard where the dinner discussion group would meet, starting sometimes in the back patio, appreciating what the 2 of you had built there, absolutely beautiful. Not just the brick, but the landscaping and the fountain. And then at one point, we went into the house, and between the kitchen, dining room, and the garage was a new room with a skylight. And I was astonished that you two had done it together yourselves. You were an amazing team, devoted to each other and appreciating each other. After his retirement, as you've heard, Russ and Judy took their RV on annual rides into Mexico where they camped and also sought out ruins and temples and had other unexpected adventures. And Russ there used his Spanish, which I'm sure was helpful. Their RV was compact. There were 2 bunk beds and a very small bathroom at the back. So when someone was driving and another one wanted to use the bathroom, they had to latch open the door so that the driver could see out the back of the vehicle. Russ and Judy extended human kindness as they traveled, including once loading a Mexican farmer and all of his bags of corn into their RV to help him rescue his crop. Russ's easy manner and his smile would have eased any tensions from traveling the way they did, deep into a foreign country. And I'm reminded of a story concerning my in-laws. My son is married to a Russian woman, and her parents came to stay with me once, well, with all of us. My son and his wife had to go back to school in Minnesota, and so I was there with the 2 Russian-speaking parents. And I was supposed to get them to Kennedy Airport at a certain time to go back home. They were living in Uzbekistan. And it was in December, and there was a huge weather change coming. So rather than leaving in the morning to get them to their afternoon flight, we needed to leave the night before to be all right for the flight. And I didn't know what to do because we didn't speak any of the same language. So I called up Russ, and he explained the weather situation to them and that they needed to leave now. So then they went right away and packed their bags. And I didn't learn until much later that they thought the U.S. was so great that people got calls telling them about the weather. Russ was a devoted member of this church. He was interested in many things. He was on different committees and eventually on the board. He was always analyzing our church life to make things better, looking for ways to make it richer for all of us. And I recall another time when he was treasurer of the board, and I was chair of the then Social Concerns Board, and our budget was cut almost to 0. But there was an opportunity to make a plea for more money. So I turned up one evening with notes in hand, and there were 3 people, but I only remember Russ because he listened to every word I said, and he kept smiling at me. So I made the plea, and we got our full budget. He was an original member of the endowment committee, and he was one of the people who helped set the $1 million threshold, which still today safeguards our endowment funds. Russ was a gentleman, curious about others and the world. He always asked me about my consulting business. He treasured life and he made life a treasure. And I'm grateful for that and to have known him.
Thank you all for sharing those beautiful memories and stories about Russ that really captures the spirit of who he was. And that twinkle that you shared about, Kathleen, that was so present whenever I would encounter Russ, and that smile and the laugh. He had a wonderful laugh and a good sense of humor. The familiar passage from Ecclesiastes that we heard earlier actually ends with a question. What gain has the worker from his or her toil? And what is not usually included in memorial services is one answer to this existential question only a few verses later from that same chapter. I know that there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Also, that it is God's gift to us that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all of their work. Russ definitely lived life that way. He lived life to the fullest, to the hilt, and took pleasure in all his work. Russ loved his family. Russ and Judy shared a great bond together and lived life wide and full for over 44 years. Judy said to me once, life with Russ was an adventure starting with our first date. He was a loving husband, a caring father, and a doting grandfather. Then there is his truth of his deep love of learning and commitment to education. He was intellectually keen and carried a holy curiosity throughout his life about life's intimate and ultimate questions. He was a seeker of truth and a truth teller. Then there is the truth of his long and distinguished career at the FTC as a chief economist for 37 years that included groundbreaking analysis and work in creating antitrust legislation to protect people from predatory business practices like bid rigging, price fixing, monopolies, and to ensure fair competition. Underlying that work, there is the truth of his deep commitment to justice, to equity, and compassion. He abhorred injustice and intolerance, and he believed that everyone, rich and poor, should be treated fairly. And there is the adventure and travel, the truths that he enjoyed and shared with Judy. They traveled over 50 countries. I don't know how you did that. Oh my goodness. And the number of passports you must have gone through just getting those stamped. And all over the US and Mexico in their RV, visiting every national park in the continental United States, hiking, biking, walking, swimming, and RVing. And the truth of his being a master craftsman, the artist that Al spoke about, a handyman, electrician, plumber, carpenter, fixer-upper extraordinaire who fixed and built the homes they lived in, built patios and fountains and fish ponds, and replaced doors at the church. And there is the truth of his love for his beloved church and faith, Cedar Lane and Unitarian Universalism. As we heard, he served on so many different committees for so many years, and the board, and serving as a treasurer and helping with the endowment. And Judy and Russ were active in the Alliance and in dinner discussion groups for many years and supported this church generously with their time, their energy, and their money. And there are other truths as well. There's the truth of his service to this country. There's the truth of his fluency in languages, Russian and Japanese and Spanish, which he was more conversational, right, Judy? Then there is the truth of his lifelong love for dogs, his love for biking and swimming and hiking and staying fit, his competitive spirit. There's the truth of his being a bit of a collector, a compiler, completist of all things mundane and commonplace, who sometimes had a bit of a hard time letting go of stuff. There's the truth of his being frugal in his ways and at the same time incredibly and unstintingly generous. There are truths, so many other truths, yes, that are eternal, immortalized in our memories. Still, they don't express the real truth of the person, the spirit that will be so sorely missed, but that continues to live and shine brightly in our memories of him. And so, let us mourn Russ, but let us not become lost in our mourning, because his was a well-lived life, a life worth remembering and celebrating, and friends, I say, a life worth learning from, that leaves all of us a life-giving legacy of love, loyalty, caring, and selfless, open-hearted generosity. And if we can learn something of love and dedication from Russ, if his passing has lifted up for us a beacon that we can look to for inspiration in leading our own lives of courage, strength, commitment, and love, then he has not stopped blessing us, even though he be beyond our sight. And so, with his memory in our hearts, let us turn to the future, for that is ours to build. And if we carry Russ's memory into the future with us, if we dwell on the best of what has been, if we allow his life to inspire our own, then we will be inclined to be more engaged in the future which we are called to build together. Russ will only ever be as far from us as our hearts allow him to be. With this in mind, let our moments for the dead be the lives we build and the love we share in remembrance of all that has passed away from us. And let us also carry away in our hearts Paul's words to the Philippians: whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And as we do, may we remember Russ Parker. And now I invite you to please rise again to join our hearts and our voices to sing Amazing Grace, number 205. Please be seated. Today is a closing and an opening, a saying goodbye and a saying hello again. So while we say fond farewell to the Russ we knew, we greet the Russ who has become a part of us, the Russ who lives on with us as the love which is in our hearts. Russ, your life we honor. Your departure we accept, your memory we cherish. Rest now, my friend, at the end of your years with us. Your part is played. Rest in the hearts and the minds of those who love you. These words of benediction from the poet Robert Burns. An honest man here lies at rest, the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age and guide of youth. Few hearts like his the virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there is another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to remain seated for the postlude, following which we welcome you to the lounge for the memorial reception and more conversations and sharing of stories and memories of Russ Parker. Thank you for joining us.